Everyone, welcome to Inside COP28 in Dubai at Expo City. Now, I'm sitting in the sustainability zone doing this little blog, but a lot of people over the past couple of days have been asking me, what is it like to be at COP28? Now, stay with me on this one. There are two areas. So there's a blue area and there's a green area. I've been in both. I've been doing keynotes and panel sessions and media interviews basically across both with a lot of different stakeholder groups. Now, when we have a look at the blue zone, we've seen over 100,000 people go through that. Typically, the language that is used is that it is exclusive and for important people. And really, I don't like that kind of language, but that's what they're using here. Now, we've seen 25,000 politicians and world leaders. We've seen 27,000 policymakers. We've seen just under 3,000 lobbyists here as well. The lobbyists are actually split into really two camps. You've got about 2,500 fossil fuel industry lobbyists, and then you have about another 500 on the carbon capture side of the fence. Now, at first glance, you'd actually think basically that the people who are fighting for carbon capture, so CCS solutions, are all in it for the planet. However, increasingly it seems like the fossil fuel industry is learning that they can use CCS basically to essentially greenwash basically their emissions, whether it's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions from a sustainability perspective, which then actually means basically that the CCS lobbyists are not necessarily what they seem, shall we say. And then the fossil fuel lobbyists, they are basically what they seem to be. Now, the best way to describe basically what's going on the blue zone is, firstly, it's unique in terms of atmosphere, emotions and mood. Everyone who's here feels empowered. Everyone here feels that they have a voice, generally. There are always exceptions to that particular rule. Everyone is proud of the country that they're actually coming from, and everyone feels empowered to be strong. Now, summarizing what's actually going on in the blue zone, I've come from a corporate background. I would say that it's unique in that, on the one hand, it is a gigantic meeting of people, leaders, influencers, all of that kind of thing. However, unlike a traditional meeting, no one is able to leave the room until they've come to a compromise. And that's really unique. Now, at the moment, basically, it turns out that there are actually 4 sets of scripts in front of the policymakers. Those scripts vary from the planet is saved script all the way through to, well, we could have done a lot better. And the language that we'll actually see being used over the next few days, and then we'll actually see the final release of the agreements come out on Tuesday. At the moment, basically, we feel that we're going to be landing somewhere in the middle. So, for example, the most positive scripts that the policymakers have actually seen at the moment involve the phase out of fossil fuels, whereas the least ambitious scripts are the phasing down of unabated fossil fuels, that kind of stuff. Now, when we have a look at the green zone basically is showing off energy transition and also climate finance. Now, when we have a look at climate finance, I think that there could actually be a lot more from the investment community here. Now, the reason for that is when we have a look at the investment community, there's about $50 trillion worth of assets actually managed, $50 trillion worth of ESG assets under management, AUM, at the moment. That represents really more than a third of all global asset classes. So that's important. From an investment perspective, we do see a splitting. Basically, in the US, for example, we see ESG investments being increasingly politically aligned, which you have to be very careful about, because when we start politicizing investments, if you get those investments wrong, your pensions have just gone down the tube. So while it is all very well basically to take the here and now view from an investment perspective, just in terms of a returns perspective, you do need to be very aware basically that this is your pension money, this is your capital, etc., etc., etc. However, when we actually have a look at other kinds of investments, basically to reach net zero, it's estimated we need $92 trillion worth of investment just to do the energy transition. It's also estimated that over the next 10 years, we'll need up to around $30 trillion just to abate climate change. So this is through initiatives such as climate resilient infrastructure and so on and so forth. And so when we have a look at the green zone, there's a huge number of children here. Basically, they all seem to be very excited about sort of going around and actually seeing what the future might actually look like. Now, from a Dubai perspective and an Emirati perspective, yesterday I was up at the Museum of the Future, and when you go through the Museum of the Future, the Dubai Futures Foundation seems to almost take the point of view that the future needs to be filled with synthetic biology and genetically engineered organisms, plants, and so on and so forth, which is a little bit of an odd take. So as I was going through the Museum of the Future yesterday, they were talking about developing fire-resistant trees, wind-resistant trees, fungi, for example, that actually take toxins out of the soil and clean the air, these kinds of things. So I did feel basically that, from a sort of more Dubai futures perspective, it was quite odd to see so much storytelling being done around genetically engineered organisms that fix an already decayed planet, as opposed to trying to prevent that in the first place. So that's something that I've sort of found a little bit odd, basically, since I've actually been over here. And I'm sure it's just a storytelling twerk, shall we say. But anyway, so later today, basically, I've got keynotes again. So I'm going to be talking through the challenges that the world faces. We kind of all know those. I'm going to be talking through the mindset that's actually needed to actually face these challenges head on. And then most importantly, I'm going to be talking through the solutions. And as I've been having conversations with lots of people basically throughout my time here, the number of things that keep coming up basically include, should we actually be looking at the whole life cycle impact of the solutions that we are developing, to make sure that we aren't creating more problems for ourselves in the future by deploying some of these solutions. So one example of that is electric vehicle batteries. We need to mine even more lithium out of the earth, for example. Now we have solutions for that in terms of things like polymer batteries, solid state batteries. We've also got solutions that actually take the metals out of lithium ion batteries and actually create alt ion batteries, as they're called, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of one question. The second sort of conversations basically I've been having is, how do we actually do this? Now, a lot of this is actually culture and purpose. So, give you an example. Last year, we spent just under $2 trillion on the energy transition. We spent $2.1 trillion on buying weapons. And in the United States, they spent $4.1 billion on lobbying. Now, lobbying crosses a lot of different sort of areas, technology, as well as obviously climate, basically energy and all these sorts of other things. But nevertheless, when you actually really start digging into the numbers, we're actually spending more money buying weapons as a planet than we are trying to accelerate the energy transition. However, when we have a look at accelerating the energy transition, we are doing that. We had 250 gigawatts of renewables installed last year versus 64 gigawatts of fossil fuel energy generation installed last year, and so on and so forth. But, that sort of summarizes that. Realistically, if we want to accelerate these transitions, we need to move to a new economic model. And that comes down to culture and a couple of other bits and bobs. And then the third thing that keeps getting mentioned to me, particularly when I'm talking through the solutions, and people saying, we just didn't know these solutions existed. So there are solutions to the problems that our new solutions create already coming through and everything else. So that's actually got a lot of people really G'd up and buoyed up and everything else. So anyway, that's my sort of little daily blog basically from inside COP28. It's not too hot. And one thing I've actually noticed when we talk about the future of cities, for example, there have been a couple of panels on that. It's all very well to talk about smart cities, but here in the sustainability zone, it's very cool. And it's very cool because there are lots of plants around. And as a weird, odd parting fact, a little while ago, Miami hired a chief heat officer to green the city, because what we actually find is when we actually bring nature into our cities, it actually cools down our environments, actually helps us and everything else. So while we are at COP28 talking about saving the planet and saving humanity, fundamentally, if we didn't save the planet would still be here in another billion years, just without humanity on it. So we aren't really talking about saving the planet. We're talking more about saving humanity. and or making the future more comfortable for humanity and our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on and so forth. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Is there anything I've missed? Do you have any questions? If you do, basically just DM me and all that sort of stuff. You can find me on all the usual socials. And goodbye from me. Take it easy. Goodbye.